Hello and welcome to episode 12 of FTC Radio. Thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Isaac Chase, owner of Firearms Training Central. And tonight I have a special guest with me, Chris Valenzuela of Spent Brass Training Solutions out of Southern California, Upland, California to be more exact. Chris was gracious enough to join me for a conversation mostly about medical training. And Chris will be joining us out in Colorado to conduct his first responder course for us for a couple of days in May, and we're really excited about that. Chris's background, he is a military veteran, worked as a private security contractor, high threat security, currently works as a private security guard, medical instructor, EMT instructor, firearms instructor. He kind of does a lot of different types of skills, and he covers everything from beginner level, introductory level work, all the way up to advanced work. You can find him at spentbrasstraining.com. And I'm not going to take up too much more of your time. Let's just get to the interview. Hope you enjoy it, and thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me today. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
I hope the weather in Southern California is treating you well.
It is gorgeous outside today.
It is snowing yet again here in Colorado. We've had a very wet winter. You do a lot of medical training. You do firearms training, but you do a lot of medical training as well. So I kind of wanted to focus on the medical training side a little bit more today. And just to give people an idea of how deep into this you are, can you give us like your 30-second resume for your medical credentials?
Sure. So medically wise, credentials include PHTLS, TCCC, TECC. I am a TRC, Tactical Responder Certified through the International Specialty Board of Certifications. I'm an EMT, former firefighter. Let's see, what else? I think that's it for medical wise.
Okay.
I have time spent in the ER, time spent on the ambulance, time spent, as a firefighter, a municipal firefighter, and time spent overseas as a PSD medic.
Okay. So, following on that question, a lot of people, well, it's hard to get people motivated in the first place to take firearms training seriously. And beyond that, getting them to take any kind of medical training seriously is even harder than that because they don't necessarily see the value of it. It's not the fun, roll around in the dirt, shooting guns kind of training. So, what would you say to somebody who doesn't understand the value of medical training? What would you say is the most underrated part of having good medical training?
Having proper medical training, like, but by proper, I mean actual competent, professional type of medical knowledge and training, even for the lay responder. Most students always refer to stuff that they saw on TV or they saw in the movies or a friend told them about it or something heinous like that. So that's what I'm referring to. When you take a med class by a professional, you will definitely walk away, mind blown. You'll walk away, feeling just saturated and just overwhelmed by the things that you did not know. It's like, the information I give in my classes, it's like a fire hose of information. It's basically it's almost too much information, but I feel that I have to give that much information to the student or the participant because who knows when I'll ever have them again, and I'm just trying to set them up for success. So I feel that even giving too much information is more beneficial than not giving enough.
So you're a first responder on a regular basis, EMT, former firefighter. When you get on scene to something, uh, you know, to a medical emergency, how much of a difference does it make to you if the people who are already there have some idea of what they're doing with helping to stabilize the person?
Are you talking about like other responders
Yeah,
or
just
citizens?
layperson, the person who called 911, maybe somebody who witnessed a car accident.
Oh,
Um,
it makes a huge difference. And I say this because our response time as a professional responder, our response time is anywhere between 5 to 8 minutes, right? And that's depending on how far away the incident is from our station. What do we have going on at the time? Um, a lot of factors, right? Traffic, weather, things like that. So even if we ran and got our bunker gear on and we're out of the station within minutes, it's still going to take us minutes to get to the scene. So within that 5 to 8 minutes, someone could be bleeding to death. Death due to exsanguination. Someone could be dying because their airway is closed off. So, like I said, a little professional, proper medical training can go a long way. A a properly trained first responder, right, can potentially save a lot of people's lives. If they find themselves at the right place at the right time with the right training, and hopefully the right equipment, they can make a difference in someone's lives.
how often would you say that you encounter that in your regular EMT work, or as a firefighter? Did you encounter that where somebody who was on scene before you got there, not a professional, but just somebody who happened to be on the scene, actually knew what they were doing?
Never, never. It was just a lot of people crowding and looking, rubbernecking,
Hmm.
um, you know, and it's well, half of me is like I can't blame them, because
Hmm.
even if they did have some training, it's the mindset. It's once they think, professional rescuers arrive, then they wash their hands of it, or maybe they just don't want to take that responsibility of doing something, um, and then to them they're probably not confident in their skills, and so they don't want to do anything because they're not confident in their skills.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons, but in my experience, every time I've shown up to an incident where there are people gathered, bystanders, no one's ever doing anything but
Yeah.
crowding and looking.
So, um, we my partner and I, my firearms training partner and I, we've trained a lot of people in Colorado. We've had a lot of people come through our classes. A very, very, very small percentage, and I mean several orders lower than 1% of the people that we've had come through our classes have ever used their gun for self defense. As much as we want to train people to be ready for that moment, the chances that moment is coming are pretty low compared to encountering some kind of a medical emergency. And, you know, while I've not had to pull my gun on anybody, I have definitely been witness to several car accidents, major car accidents. Was the first person to encounter a guy outside my house who got shot. I myself have been pretty injured from time to time, and I think people don't understand how much use they could be if they actually had some good, competent, and, for lack of a better word, really just basic understanding of uh, first responder care for somebody. And so what would you kind of say to a person like that who doesn't understand it, but you've experienced several times being that first responder? Like, what kind of level of complexity are we talking about with the actions that you would need to take if you were that layperson?
So the first thing is the mindset, right? It's the mindset. Do you want to be? Are you a responsible citizen? Are you a responsible gun owner? Right? And well, do you have a desire to help? That's what set me along this path. Is I'm a sheepdog, right? Like I just have a strong desire to help people in need, and I'm always finding myself, helping people in need, or when I find myself in a position to help, I do help, right? So I think it boils down to mindset. If you are someone who carries a gun or goes to the range, if you're prepared to make holes, you should be prepared to plug holes.
Right. Right. Definitely. Um, when I encountered the gentleman who had been shot, I definitely had the mindset of wanting to help, but I lacked the training I felt like I needed in that moment to really be effective. But I felt like I had to insert myself into that situation because I really was the only person there. But I felt severely handicapped by my lack of knowledge about what I should do for this person. And fortunately, the situation was not uh, life or death for the guy, or at least it wasn't life or death immediately. He had been shot in the lower leg, and there was a pretty good amount of blood. But to me, from what I could tell, it wasn't a dangerous amount, at least not yet. And, there was a kind of a panic inside of me dealing with this situation and not knowing what to do. But all I did what I knew I could do, which was try to get him to calm down, you know, just try to talk to him, get him to slow his breathing down, get him off of his feet. And fortunately, first responders showed up within less than a minute from me finding this guy. But it was in that moment where I just felt totally unprepared as far as my skills went. I felt prepared to help the guy as far as my mindset, like, I'm going to go help this guy. But my skills were not there. And it was kind of terrifying to be in that situation.
I understand exactly what you mean 100%. That's what initially got me into the medical side. So I am a combat veteran, right? And I was in the initial invasion of Baghdad in 2003. And yes, that feeling of inadequacy, of helplessness, watching, people, friends, teammates getting hurt, and there's only one medic for 30, 40 guys, and there's just not enough hands, and having that desire to want to help, but at that point in time not having the skill set to do more than I could at the time, right? So I understand exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So I want to kind of switch gears here a little bit. We're still going to talk about medical training, but it seems to me from outside of being a professional in this world that the interest and the quality of training in the last 5 years for tactical emergency medicine or first responder training has gone up quite a bit. Used to be, you should be CPR certified. And now nobody talks about CPR certification anymore. That's kind of like, well, obviously you should be CPR certified, but you should also be certified stop the bleed or, you know, um, the tactical emergency medicine training. What do you think has been responsible for that growth of both skills and demand and supply in this world?
So there's a few factors there. One, there has been an increase in certain types of incidences, specifically active shooter or mass casualty, right? Incidences within the
Hmm.
past 5 years, um, and those type of incidences produce very particular types of wounds, right? Specifically, penetrating traumas, gunshot wounds, penetrating traumas, and in order to combat those or fix them or address those, or apply an intervention, now we are using, right, battlefield medicine. So we have adapted battlefield medicine on the civilian side. um, we have learned, right, being in war, in Iraq and Afghanistan for over 15 years, we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot through battlefield medicine, what works, what doesn't work, why it does work, why it doesn't work, things like that, right? And also because of that long periods of time in two conflicts in those two areas, we have a lot of experienced people coming out, right? In the service, getting out of the service. So now we have high quality instructors. We have a lot of individuals with combat experience, with real world experience, and that's now trickling down into the civilian side. So it's a few reasons, right? So one, we have better equipment, right? For example, like hemostatic agents. Two, we have better trained personnel including instructors and better trained responders, right? Providers. And I don't know. Those are the two biggest that come to mind. Following that, being on the civilian side, we do have faster response times, and now PPE, right? Personal protective equipment is commonplace, or at least getting more commonplace on ambulances and fire departments. So that definitely has a place. But I think the two biggest things is the advantage of having better equipment like hemostatic agents, tourniquets, tools like that, and better better providers due to high quality instructors and high quality education and training courses.
So, when we talk about high quality training and education, one of the things I talked about with a firearms instructor in the last episode, which we'll be posting up this week, is the difficulty for firearms training at attaining some kind of a national standard for certain types of training. So, the NRA has built their training programs for instructors and they've built their training classes, but a lot of people wouldn't consider the NRA necessarily adequate when it comes to training. So they've established some kind of a national standard, but it's not really very adequate. And then you have pretty much everybody else's idea. This is how you should do concealed carry training. This is how you should do home defense training, and so on and so forth. But from an outsider's perspective, it seems like in the tactical emergency medicine or the emergency medicine first responder, there is a lot more of that standard. Just you talking about your own uh, qualifications, there's national organizations that have developed standards around certain types of medical care that are recognized and accepted by the industry as either state of the art or at least qualified and adequate for for the challenges that they're trying to address. Why do you think that is in the medical world more standardized?
Got you. Easy answer. It's because for most of us, we hold a medical license, right? A license to practice medicine. Whether you are a basic or advanced level provider like an EMT or EMT paramedic, or a RN, right? A nationally registered nurse, right? Or a PA, physician's assistant, or a MD, medical doctor, right? Each of those levels, we have a medical license. And so, in order to obtain those medical license, we need to go through an approved and accredited medical course, right? An EMT course, I think here in California, the minimum is like 160 hours for that course. For paramedic, it's like 1,000 hours. Okay, right, and it just goes up and up and up from there, and we need to maintain those medical licenses through something called continuing education units. Every 2 years, we need to provide a certain amount of CEUs to maintain that medical license. So for us, in the medical community, regardless of if it's tactical medicine, emergency medicine, pre-hospital, or in the hospital, right? We are professionals that work in the medical field, right? And so we have credentials, we have oversight, we have committees, and we have agencies like that because people's hands are in our lives, right? At some point of care, right? We have direct patient contact, and the things that we do or do not do will adversely affect our patient for better or worse. So
That
that's
makes a lot of
why,
sense. Yeah.
yeah, so that's why there is a you know, a higher organization and standard of care when it comes to medical providers and things of that such.
Right. And I think in the firearms world, there's definitely going to be some resistance to licensing and kind of that national standard based on a professional licensing thing. Because as soon as you start getting into that licensing thing, people start thinking, well, you know, uh, I don't want there to be some kind of government or national influence on anything relating to guns, where you wouldn't necessarily see that with medical care. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying you're definitely going to run into that resistance, I think, on the firearm side. And on the medical side, it's going to be much more acceptable because it's kind of it's not based around a constitutional right.
Well, see,
And
here's another thing: is medicine, Western medicine, is based on science,
hmm
right? Whereas um, instructors, right, given a certain geographical location, might have certain preferences and biases and things like that. So the way an instructor in New York might teach students different the way that they're going to teach them in Texas versus Louisiana versus Washington versus California, right? You're
hmm
going to get different instructing methods. You're going to get different, biases. You're going to get different ways of doing it. Now, I would probably say, 80% of that is all going to be the same, but it's the 20% difference. Whereas on the
right.
medical side, there is no difference. It should be, at least, right? Um, it's supposed to be the same all the way around, no matter what state you're in. Um, and that's why we have the national registry, right? Because the
Right.
test is the same, the science is the same, no matter where you are.
We all bleed the same, right?
Yes, right. So,
um
yeah, so science has a huge, huge part to play.
so as an EMT, you must commonly come in contact with just crazy methods of injury, um, and weird things that happen to people that they would have never expected to happen, that cause them to need emergency medical help. Um, does that seem true, or is most of your are most of your calls pretty routine, or how does that work?
No, no. I mean, the routine ones are like your frequent flyers, but um, I can respond to 10 vehicle accidents in a month, and five of them are the same rear end, and then the other five are all going to be different. A car
hmm
fire here, a side impact here, a front to front, and so it just depends. I would say for the most part, you know you're going to have a lot of randomness, a lot of
hmm
randomness. um, my last apartment that I worked at, was in the desert, and you know, people out there in the desert are on fixed incomes, low fixed incomes, and it was just full of meth houses, and so the things that I saw out there, are going to be a lot different than the things I'm going to see in the downtown, metro city areas.
Right. So knowing how diverse and random the medical emergencies can be, I'm guessing here, but it's a core set of skills that you have that you're going to use to address almost all of those types of injuries or illnesses, right? I mean, it's not like you need to know how to do a million different things because you're going to encounter a million different types of accidents.
Correct. Right. You have your core skills, and then as you advance in your provider level, right, or your competency or your skill set, right? You add to those core skills, but at the very least, you have a core group of skills as an EMT or as a first responder.
And in your classes that you teach, your 1-day first responder course and your 2-day first responder course, um, I'm guessing you sort of do a um, introduction, high level to most of those core skills, kind of at the first responder level, not necessarily at the EMT level. But I'm expecting that after walking away from your one of your courses, if I drove right into a car accident scene and there was somebody with, arterial bleeding in the front seat, that I would have the skills, hopefully, that I need at that moment to at least give them a chance.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're definitely going to get the core skills, and you're going to get the confidence and on not only how to use them, right, but when to use them.
So, how do you develop your classes then? Like, you've been doing these for a long time. I'm sure there's been some trial and error. What has influenced you in your core curriculum for these types of classes?
Well, experience is always the first, right? The first
Yeah.
thing. I've been, I've been an EMT since 2005, so I've been in the emergency medicine field for quite a while now, and within that time frame, I've just picked up a lot of things, right? I've always just added to my repertoire. I've always been a student, always learning, always learning, never stop learning. Um, so I forgot to mention this earlier, but I actually started teaching at a college as an EMT instructor at a
Oh,
college.
cool.
So I actually have my own students, right? My own EMT students at the college level, and I love teaching them, right? And I love passing on all of my knowledge to them, all of my tricks, because I want them to be successful because they are the next wave, they are the new generation, right? So me developing my own courses was, where did I start from, right? And where am I at now? And thinking, of someone taking my class, like, what do I want to learn? How do I want to learn it? How can I make it a fun learning environment? And when it's all said and done, right, having that confidence to be able to actually use what I just learned from this class.
So, on that note, you're going to be coming out to Colorado in May to teach your 1-day tactical emergency responder course. Give us kind of a overview, high level overview of the topics that you cover in that class.
Sure. So, first thing I always start out with is the combat mindset, right? I talk about because as a lay person, right, most lay people aren't used to high stress types of situations. So, if someone is responding to an incident where someone has a potentially um, life-threatening wound, right, or injury, they are probably going to be under a high amount of stress. So the first thing I talk about is what happens to the body and the mind under stress. Okay. Then I jump into the acronym SCAB, which stands for Scene Safety, Self Safety, Circulation, Airway, and Breathing. Circulation, in this case, what I'm referring to is blood loss, right? Hemorrhage, massive hemorrhage. So I talk about the two types of bleeding, right? Um, Life-threatening and non-life-threatening, and then I go over the progressive strategy on how to deal with life-threatening bleeding. Um, and I get very detailed in the equipment and the progressive strategy, right? We go over the hands-on skills. Then I jump into the airway. I talk about the anatomy of the body, specifically what constitutes the airway. For the layperson, I break it down as the nose, the mouth, and the throat. And then for breathing, I talk about the lungs, and I talk about you know, pneumothorax, a sucking chest wound, right, or where the lung has collapsed, and what we can do for that. And then I finish it off with the rest of rest of the body. I jump into specifically gunshot wounds, stabs, lacerations. Let's see, and I go over improvised methods of certain types of issues and equipment that can be improvised. And let's see what else.
I
I
should have
can't.
pulled up the description while I was here. I could be feeding you,
Oh
shooting
yeah,
you with.
yeah, yeah. Well, that was right off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to come up with
It
all
is
that
a
class.
full day packed. Like I said, it is a fire hose of information packed.
Hmm.
So, we start the day early and we end late, and it is just a full day.
And
I
you
go
bring
over.
quite a bit of equipment with you when you do these classes.
Oh yes, yes. It's very hands-on. There's a lot of equipment, a lot of gear. It's because I want my students to understand like what's out there. Not only what's
Mhm,
out there, but actually how to use it. A lot of times, people will show it and then move on, and
mhm,
that doesn't do anyone any good to see it in a package, right? You have to touch it, you have to apply it, and not only apply it, you have to be shown how to properly apply it because a lot of times, right, students will think they know how to apply it properly and they don't, right? So it's just it's easy stuff once you have some professional training. It's just very time consuming, but
yeah,
it's another thing that makes it a fun class is the hands-on stuff, right?
right, right. Um, so finally, I wanna talk about um, video evidence. We're living in the age of video being everywhere. I mean, not just in the United States, but internationally, there are cameras everywhere, and thanks to social media platforms, we're seeing videos that if they existed before, they were not easy to find. And now we see a lot of self defense encounters on video, and we also see a lot of medical emergencies on video. And it gives people an opportunity to see how quickly things can go bad and how even just a little bit of knowledge and equipment can save somebody's life. So there was a video in New York City, I think it was in Brooklyn, two NYPD cops got into a shootout with a suspect, and one of the officers was shot in the thigh. And the two officers worked together flawlessly to continue to address the threat and to apply medical care to the officer who'd been hit. And it was so, it was almost like if you were going to put together a training video, this is what you'd want it to look like. And it made me wonder, NYPD is a big, big department. Obviously, thousands and thousands. I mean, what do they say? It's like this one of the largest standing armies in the world, or something like that. There's a lot of officers there, and somehow these two guys were ready and trained for this scenario. So um, video is helpful, but also it's not the only video I've seen of law enforcement being ready and prepared to deal with things like gunshot wounds and things like that. Um, so, what has been your observation of the impact of video and also the pushing of training out to officers, not just how to shoot somebody, but how to take care of them?
Yeah. So the standardizing of videos is great. I love them, and I show them in my classes. Right. Obviously, good and bad. What they did good,
Hmm.
what they did bad. How could they have done better? Things like that. Right. And it's not to nitpick or quarterback, but it's just to show the students like, hey, under stress, look, you can tell. How this person is reacting under stress. Right. And so that's where the muscle memory comes into play. That's where the applying the tourniquet 50 times comes into play, because under stress, right, we all revert to our lowest level of training. If you've only applied that tourniquet once or twice, and you need it under a stressful situation, you're set up to fail, right? So I think the videos are great. And another thing about the TACMed training is that it is becoming standardized like I said, across the nation, right? So someone taking a TCCC or TECC class in Oregon, and in Mississippi and in Kentucky or Tennessee is going to get 95% of the same information of any of those states, right? The small difference being the
The
instructor,
instructor.
right? The
Yeah.
instructor's history and things like that. But for the most part, you're going to get the same information. So that's a good thing that's happening with the TACMed courses and things like that. Now, when
Yeah.
it comes to what was the second part?
The law enforcement aspect,
Oh,
like
teaching
seeing
law
law
enforcement. Okay.
enforcement. Yeah.
So I've taught a few law enforcement agencies over here in Southern California, and I don't know how it is in any other state. I can only speak for Southern California, but it is like the wild wild west over here in Southern California. Okay, every agency is their own little fiefdom. No one likes to play with others. No one, they don't, and unfortunately, when I go and train, these law enforcement officers, um, they are there because they have to be, not because they want to be.
Hmm.
And that's about 80% of the student base is there because they have to be, not because they want to be. So, like I said, there's a small percentage that is there because they want to be, because they understand the nature of the training, the value of the training. But for the most part, most officers are there because they have to be.
Yeah.
They, you can just tell they just sit in the class with their arms crossed, and they're just like, "Great, another day. I'm here. Can we get out of here? Is the day over?" And they're grumpy, they're tired, and they're not they're not good students. They're not good participants, for the most part. Yeah, and
Well,
like,
yeah, anytime you have mandated training, you're definitely gonna get that no matter what the training is.
yeah, yep, I get it. I've been there too,
Mhm.
but for me, I'm coming in there because this is my bread and butter. This is makes me happy, makes my heart happy. So when
Mhm.
I get in there, I'm just, I'm 100%, I'm 110%, and I'm high, and I'm like, I'm just afterburners going, and I hit these guys with my, my afterburners, and these guys are just sitting there looking at me with like blank faces. I get some good questions every now and then. I get some good participation from the few that want to be there. But
Yeah.
for the most part, it's rough. It is rough teaching and training law enforcement, um, and it's because once again their mindset, right? Most of
Mhm.
their mindset is, I'm not a medic, I'm not an EMT, I'm not a first responder, I'm a police officer. Like
Right.
that's their mindset. Now, like I said, some departments are slowly changing that way because they've had officer involved shootings, or they've had someone personnel die, in the line of fire. So their whole mindset has changed now. So there are some that are very receptive to the training, um, and there are some, unfortunately, the majority are just not. They're there because they have to be.
Right. Well, speaking of the videos that I mean, I spend a lot of time studying real world self-defense stuff because I think you're throwing away a great resource if you're not using that stuff. And when it comes to officer involved violence, whether they're receiving it or whether they're giving it, um, you definitely you see a different mindset for an officer who's prepared than one who's not. An officer who's prepared to render aid to a bad guy or even to a fellow officer, and then an officer who is completely unprepared to do that. And it really is a mindset thing. I'm thinking of a video from Colorado Springs where two officers shot a fleeing suspect and he ended up dying. But their first response after shooting him, as soon as he was down on the ground, was to start medical and to do what they could to save his life. And he ended up dying. But you can hear on the body cam, you can hear the tone of voice, you can hear the level. Or how do you say this? The level of not panicking, the
Right. The calmness, the
the
coolness, the collectedness.
right. Suspect down, get on the radio, get medical, go get the bag, put on the gloves, find the bullet holes, talking to him, even talking to the guy. I mean, they just shot this guy and they're like, hang on, buddy, hang on. Um, that is evidence of a mindset difference when it comes. And I think that comes with training more than anything else. You're not panicking, you're not freaking out. You're present, you're in the moment, and you're prepared to handle the situation. And in this case, some people aren't going to be saved after getting shot 3 times on the side of the road. But the training was there to apply that aid and at least try, you know.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. You know, stress inoculation in training, during training, any training, right? And it doesn't matter if it's medical, shooting competitions, close quarters battle, hand to hand, whatever have you, any type of training, when you add stress, stress inoculation into it, man, it makes for a better training. It makes for a more realistic training so that when it really happens to you or it happens in the real world, you know, you know what to expect to a certain point and you will react accordingly, hopefully, right, like those guys did,
mhm,
calm, cool, and collected.
mhm. Yep. Um, yeah, so again, comes back to training. It's if the more serious you take your training, the more prepared you are for a good outcome in whatever it is that you were training for, whether that's self defense or medical or driving. You know, I mean, people don't get enough training just driving their car, and they get in that car and they use it every single day, and it amazes me that people don't take that more seriously. But nobody's forcing them to, so that's what you get.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah,
you don't know the limits of your you don't know your limits until they've been pushed, right?
right.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Like I said, we're having you out to Colorado Springs May 2nd and 3rd of 2020, and we are actively promoting that class right now. We're going to be doing your 1-day tactical first responder course, and looks like I've been following your social media. Looks like you've been pretty busy already this year.
Yeah,
So
it's been a good year. I've been
yeah,
yep, a lot of medical classes so far.
good. Good. All right. Well, thank you for joining me. And people can find you on Facebook at Spent Brass Training Solutions or on Instagram at Spent Brass Training. It's Spent Brass Training, right? Not Spent Brass Training Solutions on
Right,
Instagram.
yeah, it was too long on IG, so yeah, so
I have to
frustrating.
test my memory every time I do one of these podcasts. I'm like, I got to remember all this stuff. So, and of course, at spentbrasstrainingsolutions.com. And you are located in Southern California. Where exactly? You're in Upland, California?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay, which is just a little bit north of the LA metro area.
Yeah, about 45 minutes away.
Okay, depending on traffic.
Yeah, depending on traffic.
All right. Well, anything else you want to add before we end
No,
this?
hey, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, man. I had a lot of fun with you, and I hope this reaches, the right people. And any questions, reach out, and I'll do what I can for you. Thanks a lot, Isaac.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Hey, you're welcome.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening, and you can find more at firearmstrainingscentral.com. You can also find us on SoundCloud. We also host these podcasts on Facebook, Gunstreamer, and YouTube. If you want to find a training class near you, or if you're an instructor looking to get more attention for you or your teaching, please check out firearmstrainingscentral.com. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you next week.